Over the weekend, the world came together to pay final respects to Singapore's great leader. Japan faces a very sad truth, and China has a great idea for aviation safety. These stories are coming up next. This is the Asia Brief. A very good, magnificent Monday morning to you. Today is March 30th, 2015. My name, of course, is Steve Miller, and it is a pleasure to have you with me here today. Now, over the weekend, world leaders and Singaporeans alike gathered to pay their final respects to the very first Prime Minister of that city nation-state, Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. Tens of thousands came out in the pouring rain, standing along a 15-kilometer procession through the streets of Singapore. The funeral itself was attended by over 2,000 and was essentially a who's of the world's elite. We're talking Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, India's Narendra Modi, Indonesia's Joko Widodo, South Korea's President Park Geun-hye, former President Bill Clinton, and several others. Now, if you haven't been following the death of Lee, you may be asking yourself, why is so much attention being placed on this one man? What's the big deal? Well, I touched upon that in Friday's Asian News Weekly podcast. Look at the way the world has responded to Lee's death. And I'm talking about the way specifically world leaders are responding. They're doing more than simply offering their condolences. They're really taking a time to offer their respect to this very elder statesman. And I use that word deliberately, statesman, because if you take a look at our politicians today, I don't think anyone truly lives up to that definition. In fact, going back in time, there's only a handful that I would say are the same caliber as Lee. At the funeral, the very first person to eulogize Lee was actually his son and current Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong. He said his was the original Singapore roar, passionate, formidable, indomitable. To those who seek Mr. Lee Kuan Yew's monument, Singaporeans can reply loudly, "Look around you." Singapore President Tony Tan Keng Yam said, "Over the past week, we have mourned the passing of a man and an era. There will never be another Lee Kuan Yew. No one person can take his place, nor what he did." And he's absolutely right. Some 500,000 people came out to see Lee in state. They waited in the rain. They waited in line for up to 10 hours. And what Lee was able to achieve, what he strove for, is what something every single political leader around the globe today should also do. And sadly, they fall short. They really need to take a look at what it means to be a leader, or as I said on Friday, a statesman. That is what the world needs today to move us as a collective society forward. Last year, Japan entered dialogue with North Korea, hoping to find out the fate of several abductees. At the time, I said it was a very bad idea because they wouldn't get anything out of the dialogue, wouldn't get anything out of the exchange, and really, North Korea was only trying to goad Japan into lifting sanctions. Now it appears Japan is finally coming around and realizing that idea. After North Korea has continually delayed reporting on the issue, Japan will decide on Tuesday if they will extend a trade embargo, ban North Korean charter flights, and prohibit North Korean ships from entering Japanese ports. Japan had lifted some sanctions in the past in exchange for North Korea investigating the fate of those abducted. Japan will actually leave some of those lifted sanctions in place while contemplating implementing these new prohibitions. Japan and the world needs to wise up. North Korea, the DPRK, cannot be trusted. They can't be held to their word. When they make a promise, I always look at it this way. It's going to be broken. There's no incentive for them to keep their word, for them to keep their treaty obligations. And truth to be fact, we rarely have seen them ever own up to what they say they will do. We've seen it several times in South Korea. Japan is learning this now. And really, we even see it with the six-party talks. They've said that they're going to halt their nuclear program, and they haven't. They don't abide by UN sanctions. China and Russia want the resumption of talks. Well, so does every other member of the six-party negotiation team. But the deal is that the whole point of the talks is that North Korea would be on a path to denuclearization. And they don't want to be. South Korea and the United States have said the conditions for a further discussion on the topic needs to be a renewed promise on the halt of nuclear development. North Korea isn't willing to make that. So South Korea and the United States aren't willing to meet. So you're at this impasse. Fundamentally, the world needs to look at North Korea and realize what they have been doing in the past isn't working and make a change. Without that changed point of view, nothing is ever going to alter the course of North Korea's development. They're going to continue the path towards nuclear weapons, and they're going to continue the process of what has worked so well in the past, the bait and switch. I will promise you something if you give me XYZ. And then as soon as they get XYZ, they will backtrack on their promise. I said it would happen to Japan, and it did. Last week, of course, was the tragic murder of Germanwings Flight 4U9525 passengers by the co-pilot. And it highlighted a very important lapse in aviation safety. But what really can you do to prevent one of the pilots from taking a plane down? In this particular instance of the Germanwings flight, the pilot left the cockpit and the co-pilot locked the door and then sent the plane into descent. So what exactly does this Germanwings crash have to do with Asia? Well, the Civil Aviation Administration of China has reinstated an old rule requiring 2 crew members to be in the cockpit at all times. Now, this is a policy that makes absolute sense. Not only could it reduce the likelihood or even prohibit something like this from happening, it just makes prudent safety sense that you're flying an aircraft that travels hundreds of miles per hour, carrying with it precious cargo, human lives. Why would you ever want a situation when only one person was in the cockpit alone behind a locked door? The FAA has followed suit and made this a recommendation, falling short of implementing it across the board. But this is really something every civil aviation authority should look to and implement immediately. There is no need to have only one person behind a locked door, because anything can happen there. Something as tragic as this, or there could be something medical or something else happen behind that locked cabin door that requires immediate attention by more than one individual. Well, those are the stories for this Monday, March 30th. I hope you'll take a moment to leave your thoughts down in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. If you would like more news from the region, be sure to follow Asian News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. If you do have a comment, a question, or some feedback about today's show, please shoot me an email message. That address is podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. It's easy to do. Just click the subscribe button or the subscribe tab on our website, asiannewsweekly.net. You can also do that in your favorite podcast application like iTunes or Stitcher. Subscribing is absolutely free, and when you do, the next episode is delivered automatically to you. Well, my friends, that is all the time I have today. My name is Steve Miller, reminding you to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.